My stepsister moved in after her divorce and hit on my husband, so I decided to investigate what really happened during her marriage. 2 months ago, my stepsister Roxy got divorced from her husband Elric after 5 years of marriage. She claimed she caught him cheating with his co-worker and that he'd been emotionally abusive. The whole family was devastated, especially when she revealed she was 4 months pregnant right after filing for divorce. Roxy was living with a roommate but approached me about staying with us temporarily. She couldn't afford rent anymore due to lawyer fees and was scared about being alone during pregnancy. When I discussed this with my husband David, he wasn't welcoming. He said Roxy always made him uncomfortable. I dismissed his concerns. Roxy had always been nice at family gatherings. I convinced David we needed to help family during tough times. He reluctantly agreed. The first few weeks were peaceful. Roxy kept to herself, stayed in her room, and seemed genuinely grateful. She even helped with household chores. But things changed about a month in. Roxy started wearing revealing clothes around the house, especially when David was home. Short nightgowns, tight workout clothes. She'd never dressed that way before. She constantly found reasons to be wherever David was. If he was in the home office, she suddenly needed the printer. If he was in the kitchen, she'd get hungry at that exact moment. David told me Roxy was making him uncomfortable. She'd make suggestive comments when I wasn't around, asking if he ever thought about being with someone else, saying how lucky I was to have such a handsome husband. She'd find excuses to touch him, brushing against him in hallways, touching his arm while talking, asking for help reaching things she could easily get herself. I hate to admit it, but I didn't take his concerns seriously. I thought he was being oversensitive and told him she was probably just being friendly. Last week, I threw Roxy a baby shower. She'd been sad about not celebrating her pregnancy properly because of the divorce, so I wanted to do something nice. I invited family and her close friends. The shower went well. Everyone had a good time. Roxy seemed happy, no obvious issues, but everything fell apart the next day. Roxy posted on social media claiming David had been sexually harassing her throughout her stay. She said he made inappropriate comments when I wasn't around, deliberately walked in on her in the bathroom, and tried to touch her constantly. The worst part was her claim that during the baby shower, David cornered her in the kitchen and tried to forcefully kiss her, stopping only when he heard someone coming. My family's reaction was brutal. My stepmom Claire called screaming, saying she always knew something was off about David and couldn't believe I'd let a predator into our family. Dad texted saying he was disgusted with both of us. Roxy's friends flooded David's social media with hateful messages, calling him a predator and threatening to report him to his school. David was devastated. As a teacher, these accusations could destroy not just his current job, but his entire career. He could barely speak when showing me the emails. Some parents from his school had already seen Roxy's post and were demanding he be fired. I tried talking to Roxy. She broke down crying, saying she couldn't believe I was choosing my abuser over my pregnant sister. She claimed she'd been afraid to tell me earlier because she knew I wouldn't believe her. Claire backed her up, saying I was just as bad as David for not believing her pregnant daughter, who'd already been through trauma with Elric. The atmosphere in our house became unbearable. David barely left our bedroom when Roxy was around, afraid she'd make more accusations. He suggested asking her to leave, but my entire family insisted that kicking out a pregnant woman would prove everything Roxy said about us. Then came the twist I never saw coming. 3 days ago, I was doing laundry and found Roxy's journal fallen behind the washing machine. I shouldn't have read it, but after everything that happened, I couldn't help myself. What I found made my blood run cold. The journal entries dated back months before her divorce, and in them, Roxy wrote about staging the discovery of Elric's supposed cheating, about practicing her crying for when she'd tell the family. Most shocking was an entry from the week before she moved in with us. David's always been attractive. Maybe this divorce is my chance to trade up. I just need to be patient and play my cards right. The most recent entry, dated the morning of the baby shower, read, "If he doesn't respond to my advances soon, I'll have to force his hand. Nobody will believe him over a pregnant woman. I've seen how it works. Just look at what happened with Elric." My hands trembled as I clutched the journal, rereading those damning words. The laundry room suddenly felt suffocating. I heard footsteps upstairs, Roxy moving around in the guest room. My heart pounded as I quickly pulled out my phone and started photographing each page. The camera clicked softly as I documented entry after entry of her calculated manipulation. The shower turned on upstairs. Water rushed through the pipes above me, giving me maybe 10 minutes. I flipped through pages frantically, capturing months of planning. My stomach churned reading how she'd researched emotional abuse signs and how to make someone look guilty. One entry detailed practicing crying in the mirror until she could produce tears on command. The laundry room door creaked. I spun around to find David standing there, his face pale and drawn from days of stress. He saw the journal in my hands and his eyes widened. I showed him the trade-up entry, watching his expression shift from confusion to horror. The water pipes groaned ominously above us. The shower was stopping. Footsteps crossed the hallway upstairs. David grabbed my arm, pulling me out of the laundry room just as we heard Roxy's door open. We made it to the kitchen before she appeared at the top of the stairs, wrapped in a towel, her wet hair dripping. She looked between us, eyes narrowing with calculation. Her gaze dropped to my hands, where I'd shoved the journal behind my back. The silence stretched unbearably. "Found something interesting?" she asked, her voice deceptively light. My mouth went dry. David stepped slightly forward, creating a barrier between us. I could see the muscle in his jaw twitching as he fought to stay calm. "Just discussing the grocery list," I managed, my voice voice barely steady. Roxy's smile didn't reach her eyes. She descended 2 steps, water droplets trailing down her legs. Really? Because you both look like you've seen a ghost. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it, keeping my hands firmly behind my back. Roxy took another step down, her expression shifting to wounded innocence. Unless you've been talking about me, I know this situation is hard on everyone. Her voice cracked perfectly, just like she'd practiced. David's hands clenched at his sides. I could feel the journal's edges cutting into my palms as I gripped it tighter. My phone buzzed again, insistent. We should let you get dressed, David said, his teacher's voice steady despite everything. Roxy's eyes flashed with something cold before the hurt expression returned. Of course. She turned slowly, deliberately, then paused. Oh, David, thank you for being so understanding about everything. I know my being here isn't easy for you. The implied threat hung in the air as she climbed back upstairs. We didn't move until we heard her door close. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. 2 texts from Maya, our teenage neighbor. Mrs. S., this might sound weird, but I saw your sister at the pharmacy 3 months ago. She bought like 5 pregnancy tests. I remember because she paid cash and seemed nervous. The second text made my blood freeze. This was definitely before she announced her divorce. I have the date in my diary because it was the day of my driving test. David read over my shoulder, his breathing shallow. We heard Roxy moving around upstairs, drawers opening and closing. I had to make a decision. Confront her now with what I'd found, or gather more evidence first. Roxy appeared in the kitchen doorway, now dressed in one of those too tight workout outfits. Her phone was in her hand, and I caught a glimpse of text on the screen. How's the plan going? She noticed me looking and quickly locked the screen, but not before I saw the contact name, Kay. I think I'll make some tea, she announced, moving toward the kettle. Anyone else want some? David and I exchanged glances. I made my choice. We needed more proof before confronting her. The journal alone might not be enough, especially with my family already turned against us. No thanks, I said, trying to sound normal. We were just about to go over the grocery list. David's making his famous lasagna tonight. Roxy's eyes lingered on us as she filled the kettle. How domestic. You two are so perfect together. Some people might even say too perfect. The threat was barely veiled now. She set the kettle on the stove and leaned against the counter, studying us like a cat watching mice. I should get back to grading papers, David said, his voice strained. On a Saturday? Roxy tilted her head. You work too hard. No wonder you seem so stressed lately. Stress can make people do unexpected things. I felt David tense beside me. Before he could respond, I touched his arm gently. Those essays won't grade themselves. I'll bring you some coffee in a bit. He understood the dismissal and headed to our bedroom, where he'd been working since Roxy made the home office uncomfortable for him. As soon as he was gone, Roxy's demeanor shifted slightly. You don't believe me, do you? She said, stirring honey into her tea with deliberate slowness. Roxy, it's okay, she interrupted, her voice taking on that practiced wounded quality. I understand. He's your husband. But I thought after everything with Elric, you'd at least consider that I might be telling the truth. The hypocrisy of her words, knowing what I'd just read in her journal, made me feel physically ill. I forced myself to stay calm. This is hard on everyone, I said carefully. She nodded, dabbing at her eyes though no tears appeared. I just feel so alone. Even Hannah, my best friend, seems distant now. She said I could stay with her if things got worse here, but my phone buzzed. Another text from Maya. My mom might have security footage from that night. Want me to ask? I quickly silenced my phone, but Roxy had noticed. Popular this morning, she observed. Just work stuff, I lied. She sipped her tea, watching me over the rim of the mug. You know, I've been thinking about looking for my own place. This situation can't be good for any of us. Hope flared in my chest, but I tried not to show it, if that's what you think is best. But then again, she continued, setting down her mug with a sharp click, where would I go? A pregnant woman with no job, no support system except family who's starting to doubt her. It's not safe. The manipulation was so transparent now that I'd seen her journal. How had I missed it before? We want you to feel safe, I said, the words tasting bitter. Do you? She stepped closer, her voice dropping. Because sometimes I wonder if David's complaints about me are really about making me leave. First Elric, now David. Why do the men in my life want to get rid of me? I heard our bedroom door open down the hall. David was probably listening, worried about leaving me alone with her. Roxy heard it too and raised her voice slightly. I just hope the stress doesn't affect the baby. The doctor said I need to avoid conflict, but it seems to follow me everywhere. She placed a protective hand over her stomach, the gesture so practiced it looked rehearsed, which, according to her journal, it probably was. We all want what's best for the baby, I managed. Do we? Her eyes bored into mine. Because I'm starting to feel very unwelcome here. And when pregnant women feel threatened, they have to protect themselves. You understand that, right? The threat was crystal clear. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She smiled then, bright and false. Good. I think I'll go rest now. This conversation has been exhausting. As she headed upstairs, she paused. Oh, I might do a little social media update later. My followers have been so supportive through all this. They really want to know how I'm doing. The warning sent chills down my spine. I waited until I heard her door close before rushing to our bedroom. David was pacing by the window, his phone in his hand. 3 more parents have emailed the principal, he said without preamble. They're calling for an emergency board meeting. I showed him Maya's texts about the pregnancy tests and security footage. His face went even paler. We need to be smarter about this, I whispered, glancing at the door. She's getting suspicious. Suspicious? David's voice cracked. She just threatened you you in our own kitchen. This is insane. I know, but we need more evidence. The journal helps, but my phone lit up with a call from Hannah, Roxy's best friend. I answered quickly. Hey, I can't talk long, Hannah said, her voice hushed. But Roxy just texted me asking if she could stay with me. She said things are escalating with David. What's going on? My heart sank. Roxy was already moving to her next phase, whatever that was. It's complicated, I said carefully, very aware that Roxy might be listening. Look, I love Roxy, but Hannah paused. Some things aren't adding up. Can we meet? Not at your house? We arranged to meet at a coffee shop the next day. After I hung up, David showed me his phone. Roxy had posted on social media, feeling so unsafe right now. Some people just can't accept the truth. Grateful for all your support. The comments were already pouring in, each one more vitriolic than the last. Someone had tagged David's school. Another person offered to start a petition for his removal. I'm going to lose everything, David said quietly, sinking onto our bed. I sat beside him, my mind racing. The journal was still hidden in our closet where I'd stashed it while Roxy was making tea. But how long before she noticed it was missing? And what would she do then? My phone buzzed again. This time it was my dad. We need to talk about David. This situation has gone too far. The walls were closing in. Roxy had orchestrated this perfectly, just like she had with Elric. But now I had proof of her lies. I just had to figure out how to use it before she destroyed our lives completely. I looked at David, seeing the defeat in his eyes, and made a decision. We weren't going to be her next victims, not if I could help it. We're going to fight this, I told him firmly. But we have to be smart. She's planned this for months. He nodded slowly, some determination returning to his face. What do you need me to do? Before I could answer, we heard Roxy's door open upstairs. Footsteps crossed to the bathroom, then stopped. A long pause, then her voice, loud and clear. Where is it? My blood turned to ice. She'd discovered the journal was missing. The bathroom door slammed. Footsteps pounded down the stairs. David and I stood, facing the door, knowing our time for careful planning had just run out. Roxy burst through our bedroom door, her face contorted with rage. Her eyes swept the room before landing on us. I instinctively moved closer to David, my hand finding his. She stalked toward us, her workout clothes still perfectly arranged, despite her apparent fury. I noticed her hair wasn't even slightly mussed from her dramatic entrance. Everything about her was calculated, even her anger. David positioned himself slightly in front of me. Roxy's eyes darted to our closet, then back to us. She knew we had it. I watched her hands clench and unclench at her sides. She took a deep breath, and I could practically see her switching tactics. The rage melted from her face, replaced by wounded confusion. She sank onto our bed uninvited, placing a protective hand over her stomach. Her shoulders began to shake with what looked like sobs, but I noticed no actual tears fell. David's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He glanced at it and his face went white. He showed me the screen. Another parent had posted in the school's Facebook group demanding his immediate suspension. Roxy's fake crying intensified. She rocked back and forth, mumbling about stress and the baby. I noticed her peek through her fingers to gauge our reaction. My phone rang. Dad's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, but Roxy had seen. Her performance escalated. She stood abruptly and rushed to our bathroom. We heard retching sounds, but they seemed forced. David and I exchanged knowing looks. When she emerged, she clutched the doorframe dramatically. Her face had gone pale. I wondered if she'd somehow made herself look sick on command. She stumbled back to the bed, her hand never leaving her stomach. David's jaw tightened as he watched her performance. My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. Roxy's asking weird questions about your finances, something about needing money for a lawyer. I quickly deleted the message, but Roxy's eyes tracked my movements. She swayed slightly, then steadied herself against our dresser. David's phone rang. His principal's name appeared on the screen. He had to answer this one. He stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. Alone with Roxy, I watched her facade crack slightly. Her eyes hardened as she studied me. She moved to our closet and began rifling through it. I stayed silent, knowing any protest would confirm her suspicions. She pulled out boxes, tossed aside clothes, her movements becoming increasingly frantic. David returned, his face grim. He held up 3 fingers, 3 more complaints filed with the school board. Roxy spun around, her search forgotten. She clutched her stomach again, wincing. The timing was too convenient. She staggered toward the door, pausing to grip the frame. Her breathing became labored, each gasp perfectly timed for maximum effect. I heard footsteps on our front porch. Through the window, I saw Claire's car in our driveway. Roxy must have texted her. The doorbell rang insistently. Roxy's performance intensified. She slid down the wall, cradling her belly. David went to answer the door while I stayed with Roxy. She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, her nails digging in. Claire's voice carried from the entryway, shrill and accusatory. I heard David trying to explain, his teacher's calm barely holding. Roxy's grip tightened. She pulled me closer, her breath hot on my face. Her eyes were completely lucid, calculating. Claire burst into the bedroom, immediately rushing to Roxy. She helped her daughter stand, shooting venomous looks at me. Tom appeared in the doorway behind David. He surveyed the scene with an unreadable expression. Claire demanded we call an ambulance. Roxy protested weakly, insisting she just needed rest and safety. The implication was clear. Tom stepped forward and felt Roxy's forehead. She flinched away from his touch, whimpering, but I caught Tom's slight frown. Her skin was cool, not feverish. David's phone buzzed again. Another parent, another complaint. The situation was spiraling beyond our control. Claire helped Roxy back to the guest room, their progress slow and dramatic. Tom lingered, his eyes meeting mine briefly before following his wife. Once alone, David showed me his phone. The principal had scheduled an emergency emergency meeting for Monday morning, 3 days away. I retrieved the journal from its hiding spot behind our winter coats. We needed to act fast. I grabbed my laptop and started uploading the photographed pages to multiple cloud services. A knock on our door interrupted us. Tom stood there, his expression troubled. He glanced down the hall, then stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He pulled out his phone and showed us a text from Roxy, sent 3 weeks ago. She'd asked him for a $5,000 loan, claiming she needed it for prenatal care. He'd declined. Another text, sent yesterday, asked if he'd reconsider. This time she'd mentioned possibly needing to move out of our house due to safety concerns. Tom pocketed his phone and left without another word, but his doubt was clear. I heard Claire's voice from the guest room, cooing over Roxy. The contrast with her harsh treatment of us was stark. My laptop dinged. The uploads were complete. I created a shared folder and started organizing the evidence chronologically. David's coworker texted him. Roxy had approached her last week at the grocery store, asking questions about David's female students. The coworker had found it odd, but hadn't mentioned it until now. I added this to our growing evidence file. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Hannah called again. I stepped onto our back porch to answer. She told me Roxy had been asking about David's salary, his pension, our house value. The questions had started weeks before the accusations. After hanging up, I found David in the kitchen, staring at his laptop. The school's parent Facebook group was exploding with posts about him. Some defended him, but they were drowned out by the angry mob Roxy had cultivated. I heard movement upstairs. Roxy was up and walking around, her earlier weakness forgotten. Her footsteps were firm, purposeful. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Joan, Maya's mother. She held a USB drive, glancing nervously around before handing it to me. Back in our bedroom, we plugged in the drive. It contained doorbell camera footage from the past month. Joan had included a note with timestamps. The first video showed Roxy leaving our house at 2 a.m. 3 nights ago. She'd claimed David had tried to enter her room that night, but the footage showed her walking confidently to a car waiting at the corner. Another video from last week showed her returning at 4 a.m. She'd told Claire she'd been up all night, terrified of David, but here she was, sneaking back in like a teenager breaking curfew. The most damning footage was from 2 weeks ago. Roxy met with a man we didn't recognize. They talked for 20 minutes in his car. She handed him something that looked like money. David's hands shook as he copied the files. This was proof she'd been lying, but would it be enough? My phone rang. It was Elric's mother, Sandra. She spoke in hushed tones, saying she had something we needed to see but couldn't discuss over the phone. We arranged to meet her tomorrow after my meeting with Hannah. The pieces were falling into place, but time was running out. Claire's voice drifted from the guest room. She was on the phone, loudly discussing David's predatory behavior with someone. Each word was another nail in his professional coffin. I checked social media. Roxy's latest post had over 100 shares. People who didn't even know us were calling for David's arrest. The digital mob was growing. David sat on our bed, his head in his hands. I sat beside him, sharing his despair. Even with evidence, how could we fight this narrative Roxy had crafted? Tom appeared in our doorway again. This time he motioned for us to follow him outside. We walked to the far corner of our backyard, away from windows. He told us about Roxy's request for money, about her questions regarding our finances. He'd started noticing patterns in her stories, inconsistencies that didn't add up. Before he could say more, Claire's voice called for him. He gave us a meaningful look before heading back inside. I spent the rest of the day organizing evidence while David tried to work on his defense for Monday's meeting, but concentration was impossible with Roxy's presence looming over us. That evening, Roxy emerged for dinner. She moved slowly, clutching furniture for support. But when she thought no one was looking, her movements were fluid, normal. She picked at her food, sighing dramatically. Claire fussed over her, shooting accusatory glances at us. The tension was suffocating. After dinner, Roxy announced she needed air. She walked to the front porch, Claire hovering protectively. Through the window, I saw her texting rapidly, a small smile playing on her lips. David's phone buzzed. Another teacher from his school, offering support. They'd worked together for years and didn't believe the accusations. It was a small comfort. I retreated to our bedroom to review the journal photos again. One entry caught my eye. Roxy had researched false pregnancy symptoms and how to fake a miscarriage for sympathy. My blood ran cold. Was that her next move? David joined me, looking exhausted. We strategized late into the night, planning for tomorrow's meetings, but every plan felt inadequate against Roxy's manipulation. Around midnight, I heard Roxy's door open. Footsteps padded to the bathroom, then silence. Too much silence. A crash echoed through the house. Claire's scream followed immediately. David and I rushed out to find Roxy on the bathroom floor, clutching her stomach. Claire was already calling 911, sobbing about her pregnant daughter. Tom stood in the doorway, his expression skeptical as he watched Roxy writhe on the floor. The paramedics arrived quickly. Roxy's performance intensified as they examined her. She kept repeating that the stress was too much, that she couldn't lose another baby. Another baby? This was a new addition to her story. As they loaded her onto a stretcher, she reached for my hand. Her grip was strong, her eyes clear and calculating despite her moans of pain. The ambulance left with Claire. Tom stayed behind, pacing our living room. He seemed to be wrestling with something. Finally, he spoke. 3 years ago, his friend's brother went through a similar situation. A woman had accused him of assault, destroyed his reputation. The woman's name? He couldn't remember, but she'd been Claire's friend from church. The description matched Roxy. David pulled up social media on his Roxy's laptop. After some searching, we found the man Tom mentioned. His profile was sparse, but one old post remained, a warning about false accusations, though he didn't name names. I messaged him, explaining our situation. It was a long shot, but we were desperate. Tom left, promising to do more digging. Alone again, David and I sat in stunned silence. How many times had Roxy done this? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging or things get worse for David. I showed David. He grabbed the phone and tried calling the number. It was disconnected. Another text, same number. Check your front door. David went to look while I stayed back, my heart pounding. He returned with an envelope. Inside were printed screenshots of David's teaching profile, his school's website, his LinkedIn, all marked with red X's. The threat was clear. We barely slept that night. Every sound made us jump. Roxy's empty room felt like a presence itself, malevolent and waiting. Morning came too quickly. I dressed carefully for my meeting with Hannah, choosing clothes that made me look trustworthy, stable. David prepared for another day of damage control. As I left for the coffee shop, I noticed a car following me. It stayed 3 cars back, but took every turn I did. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. At the coffee shop, I waited in my car, watching. The following car parked across the street. I couldn't see the driver through the tinted windows. Hannah arrived, looking nervous. We went inside together, choosing a corner booth. She kept glancing around as she pulled out her phone. The texts she showed me were damning. Roxy had been planning this for months, discussing strategies for testing David's boundaries and documenting his responses. One message made my stomach turn. If he doesn't take the bait, I'll have to create the evidence myself. Hannah had more. Screenshots of Roxy researching David's school policies, teacher conduct codes, how accusations were handled, all dated months before she moved in. She also revealed that Roxy had done this before, with an ex-boyfriend in college. That time, she'd dropped the accusations after he paid her to leave him alone. I photographed everything, my hands shaking. Hannah kept watch, clearly frightened about being seen with me. As we prepared to leave, Hannah grabbed my arm. She told me Roxy had texted her from the hospital, asking her to retrieve something from our house, something hidden in the guest room. We parted ways quickly. The car that had followed me was gone, but I felt watched as I drove to meet Sandra. Sandra lived across town in a modest apartment. She answered the door immediately, ushering me inside. Her living room was cluttered with boxes. She'd kept everything from Elric's marriage. She showed me security footage from their old house. The night Roxy claimed to discover Elric's cheating, the cameras showed her planting lingerie in his car at 3 a.m. Her own car was visible in the background. More footage showed Roxy meeting with the same unknown man from Joan's videos. They'd met multiple times over several months, always late at night. Sandra had bank statements too. Roxy had opened credit cards in Elric's name, maxing them out before the divorce. She'd hidden the statements, letting him discover the debt during proceedings. I documented everything, adding it to our growing evidence file. Sandra promised to testify if needed, her anger at Roxy evident. On my way home, I stopped at the pharmacy. The same pharmacist who'd helped Maya was working. She recognized me and discreetly nodded toward the consultation room. Inside, she told me Roxy had been buying pregnancy tests for months, far longer than her supposed pregnancy. She'd also inquired about medications that could mimic pregnancy symptoms. The pharmacist couldn't provide records without a subpoena, but she gave me her card, promising to help if legally asked. I arrived home to find David in the kitchen with Tom. They'd been researching, finding 2 more potential victims of Roxy's schemes. Both men had been accused of inappropriate behavior. Both had paid to make it go away. Tom had spoken to his friend's brother. The man was willing to share his story, though he remained traumatized years later. The pattern was identical to what we were experiencing. Claire's car pulled into our driveway. She entered without knocking, her face a mask of fury. She demanded to know why we weren't at the hospital supporting Roxy. Tom intervened, suggesting Claire calm down. She turned on him, accusing him of taking our side over their pregnant daughter. The argument escalated quickly. During their fight, I slipped upstairs to search Roxy's room. Under the mattress, I found a burner phone. The contact list was small but revealing. K was there, along with several numbers labeled only with initials. The text history was mostly deleted, but one conversation remained. Roxy discussing payment terms with someone, negotiating percentages. The context was vague but sinister. I photographed everything before replacing the phone. As I turned to leave, I noticed Roxy's laptop bag in the corner. My hands itched to search it, but Claire's voice was getting closer. I made it back downstairs just as Claire stormed out, Tom following. He gave us an apologetic look before leaving. Their marriage was clearly straining under Roxy's manipulation. That evening, the unknown man from the security footage appeared at our door. He introduced himself as Kyle, the K from Roxy's phone. David tensed, ready to defend us, but Kyle raised his hands peacefully. He said he was done with Roxy's schemes and wanted out. She owed him money for services he wouldn't specify. He warned us that Roxy was planning something bigger. She'd mentioned insurance policies, life insurance specifically. The implication chilled us. Before leaving, Kyle gave us a USB drive. He said it contained their communications, though he'd edited out anything that implicated him legally. It was better than nothing. We spent hours reviewing Kyle's files. Roxy had hired him to gather information on David, his routines, his students, his vulnerabilities. She'd paid him to photograph David at school, making innocent interactions look suspicious. One file contained her exit strategy: frame David completely, sue for emotional damages, possibly push him to sewer slide for insurance money. The casual cruelty was staggering. morning, my phone rang. It was the hospital. Roxy was being discharged and needed a ride home. The tests had found nothing wrong with her or the pregnancy. I agreed to pick her up, knowing refusal would fuel her narrative. David stayed home, preparing for tomorrow's school meeting. At the hospital, I found Roxy in a wheelchair she clearly didn't need. A nurse helped her to my car, buying into her fragile act completely. During the drive, Roxy was silent except for occasional sighs and whimpers, but I caught her watching me in the side mirror, studying my reactions. Back home, she made a show of struggling up the porch steps. Tom had returned and helped her inside, his skepticism barely concealed. That night, Roxy posted about her hospital scare, blaming the stress of living with her abuser. The sympathy poured in, along with more vitriol toward David. I sat in our bedroom, surrounded by evidence that seemed simultaneously overwhelming and insufficient. How could we prove a pattern of lies when each lie was crafted so carefully? David's meeting was in 12 hours. His career hung in the balance, and somewhere in this house, Roxy was planning her next move. I opened my laptop and began compiling everything into a comprehensive timeline. Each piece of evidence, each witness statement, each contradiction in Roxy's stories. As I worked, I heard Roxy's door open. Footsteps paused outside our room. A long silence, then they continued to the bathroom. I kept typing, documenting everything. Whatever happened tomorrow, we'd be ready. We had to be. The evidence was mounting, but so were Roxy's supporters. The battle for truth was far from over. Dawn was breaking as I finally closed my laptop, exhausted but determined. Tomorrow would bring David's meeting, more confrontations, and undoubtedly more of Roxy's manipulations. But we had something she didn't expect. Proof of her patterns, witnesses to her lies, and the determination to expose her completely. The next morning arrived with crushing weight. David dressed methodically for his school meeting while I prepared to implement our evidence strategy. Tom appeared at our door before breakfast, his face grave. He pulled us aside and revealed what he'd discovered through his pharmacy connections. Roxy had never filled a single prenatal prescription in their system. The pregnancy tests she'd purchased were the only medical items on record. My hands trembled as I added this revelation to our evidence folder. David's expression hardened with renewed determination. We had less than an hour before his meeting, but this changed everything. The pharmacist Tom had spoken with arrived discreetly at our back door. She handed over printed records showing Roxy's purchase history. Dozens of pregnancy tests over months, but zero prenatal vitamins, no prescribed medications, nothing that an actually pregnant woman would need. She'd risked her job to provide this proof. Claire's car screeched into our driveway. She stormed inside with Roxy, who moved with exaggerated difficulty. Tom intercepted them in the living room while David and I gathered our evidence. Through the doorway, I watched Tom present the pharmacy records to his wife. Claire's face went white as she processed the implications. Roxy's performance intensified. She clutched her stomach, moaning about stress affecting the baby. But Claire's expression had shifted from protective fury to dawning horror. She stepped back from her daughter, studying her with new eyes. David left for his meeting armed with our compiled evidence. I stayed behind to manage the family confrontation that was building. Tom had assembled security footage from multiple sources onto one drive: Joan's doorbell camera, Sandra's home system, even traffic cameras near locations Roxy had claimed to be. We gathered in the living room. Tom connected his laptop to our TV and began playing the footage chronologically. Each video contradicted Roxy's timeline. The night she claimed David harassed her, she was meeting Kyle. When she said she was terrified and hiding in her room, cameras showed her at an ATM withdrawing cash. Claire sank onto our couch, her hands covering her mouth. Roxy's attempts to explain grew increasingly desperate. She claimed the footage was doctored, that we'd hired someone to create fake evidence. Her voice rose to near hysteria as she insisted everyone was conspiring against her. Dad arrived, summoned by Tom. He watched the footage in stony silence, his jaw clenching tighter with each revelation. When Tom showed him the pharmacy records, something broke in his expression. He turned to me with tears in his eyes and pulled me into a fierce hug, whispering apologies. Roxy exploded. She grabbed her phone and began live streaming, claiming we were gaslighting her, that we'd planted her journal and faked all the evidence. Her followers responded immediately, some expressing doubt, but others rallying to her defense. The hashtag #Justice for Roxy began trending locally within minutes. Hannah arrived with two other friends who'd grown suspicious of Roxy's patterns. They'd compared notes and discovered similar manipulation attempts targeting their relationships. One had saved texts where Roxy asked detailed questions about her husband's work schedule. Another had caught Roxy photographing her husband at their child's soccer game. The doorbell rang continuously as more people arrived. Sandra brought bank records and divorce documents. Joan had printed social media posts showing Roxy's lies. Maya's father had traffic camera footage from his job at the city planning office. The evidence was overwhelming, but Roxy had prepared for this. A man in an expensive suit entered, her lawyer. He distributed cease and desist letters, threatening legal action against anyone sharing defamatory content about his client. Hannah visibly paled, stepping back from our group. Two other witnesses began hedging their statements. I felt the coalition fragmenting under legal pressure. Roxy smirked behind her lawyer's shoulder, confident in her counterattack. But I had one advantage: the journal itself. I retrieved it from our safe and placed it on the coffee table. The lawyer examined it, looking for signs of forgery. Roxy's confidence wavered as she recognized her own handwriting. She claimed I'd stolen old notebooks and created fake entries, but her voice lacked conviction. The lawyer requested a handwriting expert, buying buying time. Tom had anticipated this. He'd already contacted a certified document examiner who arrived within the hour. The expert studied the journal under magnification, comparing it to known samples of Roxy's writing that Claire reluctantly provided. His conclusion was definitive. The journal was authentic. Roxy's desperation peaked. She stood abruptly, clutching her stomach, and staggered toward the door. But as she moved, her shirt shifted, revealing the edge of what looked like padding. Claire gasped and reached for her daughter, her hand landing on Roxy's belly. The firmness wasn't flesh, it was foam. Claire yanked her hand back as if burned. She demanded Roxy lift her shirt. Roxy refused, backing away, but her fake pregnancy belly had shifted visibly during the confrontation. The silicone prosthetic was now crooked under her clothes, its unnatural shape obvious to everyone. The room erupted. Dad grabbed Roxy's arm to prevent her from fleeing. The lawyer stepped back, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes showing recognition of his client's deception. He muttered something about irreconcilable differences and left quickly. Cornered, Roxy's mask finally shattered completely. Her voice dropped its wounded tone, becoming cold and calculating. She evaluated each person in the room like a predator studying prey. The transformation was chilling. This was her true face. I offered her one final chance. She could admit everything and get help, or face legal consequences from multiple victims. The room held its breath as she considered her options. Her eyes darted between exits, but Tom and Dad blocked her path. She chose defiance until I showed her a journal page she'd forgotten existed, one where she'd written about destroying David, like I did the others, and listed names. 3 names matched people in our living room. Her face went white as she realized the extent of her exposed plans. The victims surrounded her, not with violence, but with determination. They demanded accountability, not revenge. Roxy tried one last manipulation, threatening to reveal what David really did, but the bluff fell flat. Everyone had seen the evidence. Her power was broken. David returned from his meeting to find Roxy surrounded by her victims. The school board had reviewed everything and formally apologized. Several board members admitted Roxy had approached them or their spouses with seemingly innocent requests that now appeared sinister. His reinstatement was immediate and came with a standing ovation from colleagues who'd supported him throughout. Faced with united opposition and legal consequences, Roxy's resistance crumbled. She admitted everything: the fake pregnancy, the false accusations against David and Elric, the schemes against others. Her confession poured out in a monotone, devoid of emotion or remorse. She'd viewed everyone as pawns in her games for money and control. Elric's lawyer had already begun preparing fraud charges based on the evidence. Other victims discussed civil suits. Roxy faced real consequences for the first time in her life. The community that had rushed to judgment now grappled with how easily they'd been manipulated. Over the following weeks, the full scope of Roxy's deceptions emerged. The fake pregnancy belly was discovered in her car. Kyle testified about their arrangement in exchange for immunity. 3 more victims from other towns came forward after seeing social media posts about her exposure. The family began the difficult work of healing. Claire entered therapy to understand how she'd enabled her daughter's behavior. Tom and Claire's marriage survived but required intensive counseling. Dad struggled with guilt over believing Roxy's lies so readily. We found Roxy's final journal entry hidden in her laptop bag. She'd planned to disappear after extracting money from David, with a list of future targets in other cities. The entry showed no remorse, only frustration that her plan had failed. She'd viewed her exposure as a temporary setback, already planning new schemes. 6 months later, our dining room filled with an unlikely group, former victims who'd become a support network. David's teaching career had recovered fully. Elric was rebuilding his life with his fraud settlement. Others were pursuing their own healing journeys. Roxy sat in court-ordered therapy. Her schemes finally ended. The community had learned hard lessons about rush to judgment and the power of patient truth over dramatic lies. Our marriage had survived its greatest test, stronger for having weathered the storm together.